Greetings, class. Welcome to part two of our lecture on death and dying. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start this week's lecture now talking about the stages of grief that individuals incur, both those who are in the process of maybe learning about their impending death when they're diagnosed with a terminal illness or with a disease, okay? But I'm also going to talk about the stages of death or grief that individuals go through who are also living alongside someone who is in their process of dying, okay? Kubler-Ross in particular is an individual who did a tremendous amount of research on this process of dying and particularly noted that there were some stages of grief, okay, that occurred as an individual confronted their own mortality in their lifetime. As research progressed, what we also started to understand were these particularly 5 stages of grief are also a process that individuals go through outside of just death, but almost any loss. So when we think about the notion of how we experience loss in our lives, death is one of those. But a loss in our lives, a sudden end to a relationship, can also be something like a divorce or a breakup. It can be a move away from friends and family to another side of the country. Loss can be through the loss of a job, especially one that you've been at for years and years, and suddenly you were let go. So loss can mean different things to different people. And what we've learned about these stages of grief is that individuals can experience these stages of grief outside of just death, but some of those other losses that we've talked about. So Kubler-Ross defined that there are 5 stages of grief, okay? Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, okay? Denial for obviously when an individual is told, let's say, that they were diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, okay? An individual may not feel fearful in that moment when they hear it. It may actually take a few days for the reality of that diagnosis to kick in. And so some individuals will leave the doctor's appointment hearing the worst possible news for their health. But then you're asking them how they're doing and they're still responding with, I'm fine, I'm okay, we'll get through it, I'll go through treatment. And in times like that, as a counselor, I've seen where individuals have been in the stage of denial, okay, for a long period of time. Now, it's important to understand that typically individuals will move through these phases here, but the grief process is never the same for every single person. In fact, every person grieves differently. But what Kubler-Ross discovered was that most individuals, the large majority, excuse me, at some point in managing loss are going to cover all of these areas, okay? But they may jump from one to the other, okay, or skip another stage entirely based on who they are and what their notion of grief looks like for them, okay? Anger, when it comes to death, okay, can mean that individuals, as they're grieving, literally become angry. They may become angry at themselves for maybe choices that they've made in the past that could have impacted their health. They may become angry with themselves saying, why did I choose to drink, or why did I choose to do these drugs, or why did I choose to smoke, and now I have cancer as a result of that. And so they may literally be angry at themselves. Some may be angry at others. In fact, some people who are dying may just be angry in general, angry at others who don't have their diagnosis, who don't know, all right, that they have stage 4 cancer, okay? And sometimes what's important to note, because we are spiritual human beings, is that sometimes some individuals may even be angry with God, right? They may be angry with the fact that they'll say, how is it that I can have stage 4 cancer, right? When I've always shown up to church, I've tithed, I've given to others, I've helped those in need, I've tried to live a holy life. And how is it, God, that you're giving me this kind of death? And so individuals who are going through these stages of death may even express anger towards God. Okay. Bargaining comes in when an individual is attempting to rationalize and understand this notion of death, and they're maybe thinking that if they turn their life around in some way, that things won't particularly impact them the same way. I can tell you right now, with the COVID-19 virus that's been spreading, right, a lot of people have been talking in this way, right? Some people are saying, well, if I just stop smoking right now, I can probably be okay if I were to get the COVID-19 virus, right? Or if I stop drinking right now, right? Or if I start to work out in this second, maybe it will give me a fighting chance against this disease. The fact of the matter is we don't know fully all of the details related to it, but in our mind we start to rationalize that if I were to make these life changes in these moments, maybe my life can be spared. Depression is obvious, right? But it's important to understand that depression looks different for individuals, okay? And so some individuals who are in the process of dying or grieving, or may have classic depression symptoms, such as isolating themselves from others, not going out, a decrease in appetite, and things like this. But sometimes what we'll also see in regards to depression is some individuals actively stopping to take their medication. They're no longer attending doctor's appointments. And what we've seen, what it looks like from the outside, is an individual, we may describe them as giving up. But in fact, what happened is they felt this total loss of control and power in their lives. And so some individuals may say, I'm just tired. I'm just tired of fighting and I don't want to do it anymore. And so that may come across as depression for those individuals. And finally, acceptance. Okay, acceptance is this notion of, is that one, the individual is aware of their diagnosis. They're aware that they are going to pass as a result of this disease, right? But at the same time, the acceptance comes in with saying, but you know what? I'm at peace with that. There's nothing I can do anymore. Tomorrow wasn't promised to me. And so I'm just going to make the most of the time that I have. Now, what's really important to understand, though, is that an individual doesn't just move from denial to anger, and then they're over anger, and they move to bargaining, and then become a little depressed, and now they're 100% okay because they've accepted their death. In fact, individuals, based on who they are, can spend different amounts of time in different areas of this grief, okay, in different stages, and they can even bounce back and forth. So someone may be in acceptance one day. They may wake up and have a really great day. They're in a great space, great mentality, right? They're getting along with others. They're feeling good. They've accepted their circumstances. But suddenly they may jump back to anger the next day, right? Angry with themselves, maybe angry with God, all these reasons. And so it's important to understand that every single person grieves differently. Okay, now that we've talked about the stages of grief, what I'd like to talk about is another um, model of how we as helping professionals help move people through their stages of grief. And this model is referred to as the tasks of grief, which can sometimes be narrowed down into this analogy here of TEAR, okay? And what TEAR stands for is T, to accept the reality of the loss, E, to experience the pain of loss, A, to adjust to the new environment without the lost person, and R, to reinvest the new reality. Now, again, we're talking about grief here. Remember what I've defined as grief is when we're responding to a loss in our lives. That loss may be death, like in the context of this lesson. But loss can also be through divorce. It can be through a breakup. It can be through a move. It can be through death, right? It can be through the loss of a job, all of these things. After I give you some examples of what this looks like, I want to create an analogy of what we're going through right now as a society related to COVID-19. And I want to make some analogies to, I think, what we're doing as a society right now in regards to grief. So one, and when we're moving an individual through these phases, what's important to understand is that this isn't just only the job of a counselor. This isn't only the job of a doctor or a nurse, okay? It's a collective job of family and friends who are assisting a person going through the stages of grief to move through these stages because it's going to impact them differently in different aspects of their lives. So for example, some individuals who are in that denial phase are going to have a hard time accepting the reality of the loss, right? And so what I mean by that is that if my wife or I were to become sick, okay, let's say it's me that was given a diagnosis, all right, then my wife has to go through this process of accepting, one, that me, her husband, is going to pass away. But there's another reality that she has to accept is that our combined income has now been cut in half, right? That someone who helped pay the bills or do certain things around the house is no longer there to help with those kind of things. And so my loss, even though it's going to be an emotional one, is also going to be a physical one, and it's also going to be a financial loss as well, okay? And so what happens is that many individuals sometimes will look to dodge the experience of the pain of loss. This is normal for all of us. No human being wants to go through this kind of pain that can be caused when someone close to you passes away, right? And so for that reason, one of the things that we have to do as helping professionals is make sure that we allow that individual to go through that process of pain. In other words, they're not going engaging in behaviors that's going to numb the pain to prevent them from confronting the reality that someone is passing. And so sometimes when a loved one is either going through a loss, either they're caring for someone who's dying or they are dying themselves, what you may start to see is the individual's behavior changing because they're trying to avoid that pain that's coming with those feelings that their life is ending. So you may see people experimenting, drinking that never drank before, right? They start to smoke. We saw this with John Wayne. When John Wayne was diagnosed with cancer, he actually increased his smoking to 2 packs a day. And it was because he said, this is the last thing I have control over. If I'm going to die of cancer, I'm going to die smoking. And that's his choice, okay? But he was also doing that in order to try to avoid this experience of loss and of pain, okay? And so the third step is that we're going to help this individual adjust to the new environment without the loss of the person. And so when someone is caring for someone who's passing away, or if my wife was coming to this notion that I was going to pass, all right, we have to help this individual adjust to the notion that they won't be there anymore. You know, their possessions, their things around the house, maybe their tools, even their car, right? Their clothes. These are things that after someone passes, many of these things have to be accounted for and distributed and maybe even sold off or whatever the case is. I think about when my grandparents passed away. My grandfather was the last one to pass away, and they had lived in their house for 40 years. And after we were done grieving the loss of my grandparents, we had to literally go through the entire house because we needed to sell it. And we had to prepare all of those things to be sold or donated and given away. And imagine going through a house where a family lived there for 40 years, right? Imagine the things that were accumulated in the process of really emptying a house that you came to grow up and to love, right? And so there's this notion of all of us in our process of grief adjusting to literally a new environment. A house that was once teeming with life is now empty, right? And you're passing along these possessions to others, right? That's difficult for people to do. And finally, what we want an individual to do when they're going through this process of grief is to ultimately be able to reinvest in a new reality, to be able to understand that, yes, tragedies take place, right? And we lose people that we love. And life is not necessarily the same after, right? But we can still be okay with a new reality, okay? And now the reason why I want to bring this up is because there also is a notion that we can grieve as individuals, as people, but we can also grieve as a society. And part of what I believe we're going through right now with this COVID-19 epidemic is that we're grieving as a society. So think about this for a second. You know, just a few weeks ago, right, life was continuing on relatively normal, right? If you needed to go out, you just went out. You didn't give it much thought. You know, you didn't want to get a cold, you didn't want to get a flu, but you didn't think about inheriting suddenly a life-threatening illness. When you wanted to go to the movie theaters, you went to the movie theaters, right? When you wanted to hop into your car and drive to go visit a friend, you know, you just hopped in and did that. And suddenly now, every aspect about our life is different, right? When we go to the store, we're hoping maybe they have everything that we need, or maybe we're thinking, I need to go to 2 or 3 stores to kind of patch together the groceries that I need, right? We are constantly bombarded in the news and media of who has been infected lately, of what countries are experiencing higher losses and deaths, right? And so we're constantly even reading material that's different than what we did before. We can't engage in social life the same way that we did before because we can't just go out and watch a movie or go to a sporting event or a basketball game, right? And so as a result of this, it's important to understand that I believe that we are in a process of grief as a society as well. Individuals who have lost loved ones during this pandemic, and not even to COVID-19 in particular, but who have just had family members pass, aren't even allowed to grieve in the same way. Because in many states, funerals have been limited to groups of 20 or even groups of 10 or less, okay? And so some individuals are saying, we're gonna wait to bury our loved ones until after the COVID-19 pandemic has slowed down. And other people are saying, well, we have to proceed with the funeral. But even those people that would have attended a funeral aren't able to attend funeral services in certain churches, okay? And then at the burial site, you're only allowed to have a limited number of people there. So literally our entire way of life and even our entire way of managing death has changed in the past few weeks. And as a process, you may see family members or friends or even yourself going through this process of grief. What you may see is even yourself or other people that you know and love going through those 5 stages of Kubler-Ross, right? Of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, because we're still trying to get a grasp on what life looks like for us now, and we miss the lives that we had before, right? So it's really helpful to understand that this task of grief is something that we're all going through, I think, in this moment, all in different ways. Okay, for this slide, what I'd like to do is draw your attention to a couple of quick reflective activities, okay? Ultimately, if you're interested in becoming a nurse or a speech pathologist or working in the helping professions, then what you're really assisting with is to, if you work with individuals who are dying in particular, if you're working in hospice or you're serving individuals who have been diagnosed with a terminal illness, then what your job is to do is to assist and allow that person to die with dignity, right? And so no one wants to go through those final moments of their life in fear or feeling like their life or their own identity never mattered, okay? And so what I'd like for you to be able to do is first jump onto to Blackboard, and I've posted this video of a nurse's testimony on Blackboard, whose job is to actually work with individuals who have been diagnosed with terminal illnesses, okay? And I'd like you to hear the experiences of this nurse who talked about this notion of what it meant for her, professionally as well as emotionally, right? To have a very difficult job of working with individuals who know that that the end of their life is near, but also how she saw her ethical and professional obligation to serve those individuals with dignity. After you've watched that video, I'd like you to come back and we'll engage in these reflective questions together, okay? So you can go ahead and put me on pause, watch the video, and then return back to this slide. Okay, if you've returned back to this slide, then I hope you found the video information useful, all right? And so what I'd like you to be able to do then is, we're talking a lot about this notion of saying goodbye. But we also still have time here, right? We still have time to serve others. We're still completing our education. We still have career goals in mind. And even though things are really crazy right now, I think it's also helpful to reflect on where we're headed in our life, right? And the opportunities that we still have. John C. Maxwell had wrote, and I'm sorry, this is supposed to be, there was a little bit of a typo here, but you can tell a lot about which direction your life is heading by looking at the people with whom you've chosen to spend your time and share your ideas with, right? And so if you look at your group around you, your friends, your family, those that you trust most, all right, that's going to be an indicator of where your life is heading, right? There's a saying in Spanish that says, tell me who your friends are and I'll tell you who you are, right? And so oftentimes what we could say is, just like Maxwell, is that who we choose to spend time with and engage with is also where our life is going to be headed. So think about that for your own lives, and maybe who is in your social networks around you. Think about the goals that you have for yourself professionally, maybe emotionally, maybe spiritually, maybe financially. And now think about that group of friends that you have, right? The people that you trust the most. Are they helping you get to where you need to go, or are they pulling you away from your goals? And the reason why I want you to really spend some time thinking about this is because later in life, as you start to get older, and I know it may not seem that way right now, but I can guarantee you, at some point in your life, you're going to start to look at your lifespan and you're going to start to realize that maybe you have less days in front of you than you have behind you, okay? And what's important to understand with that is I don't want for you to wait till later in life to take care of some of those life dreams that you have. There's a lot of things in life that will say, you know, I can do that later. I can do that later, right? Maybe I'll go for that dream job a little later, right? Maybe I'll take that vacation to that place around the world that I really want to go to later. You know, maybe I'm going to work on my health, you know, a little later. Maybe I'll start reading my Bible daily, but I'll do that in, you know, the next 6 months. I'll get around to it. Well, one of the things I'm really hoping that you understand both from this lecture and all the craziness that's been happening around us lately, is that later is never promised, right? Later is never guaranteed. You have the time that you have here now, and we make the most of the time that we've been given, right? We can literally treat every day like a blessing. And so for you, what I'd like you to consider is, what are maybe 3 laters that you have, 3 dreams that for you is something you really have been wanting to do, but you've passed those off and you've said, I'll get to those later, right? I'd like you to take note of what those laters are, okay? What I'd like for you to be able to do is think about then, well, how do you want to be remembered, right? How do you want to be remembered one day when someone's talking about you, right? What would others say you added to the world, okay? And then think about this notion, how do you think some of your friends or family want to be remembered, right? And then what laters could you help them accomplish? In this time right now, more than ever, we've been living in the present, day to day, literally, right? And so what are some laters that some people that you love and care about maybe want to accomplish in their lives, and maybe could you help them with those? What I'm going to do, I'm going to post on Blackboard here, okay, and this is up to you if you want to see this, this final sermon that was delivered by Reverend King Jr., and it was called The Drum Major Instinct, okay? This was the final sermon that Dr. King Jr. delivered to his congregation in Atlanta before he was assassinated. And in this final sermon, in the final 2 minutes of the sermon, Dr. King talks about how he wants to be remembered, and particularly how he wants to be spoken about at his own funeral. And it's a very powerful reminder of what matters in life. And so one of the things that excites me most about you all is you've chosen amazing careers to be a part of. You genuinely want to help others, and you want to help others make the most of their lives by treating them and their physical ailments, right? And so now I'd like you to reflect on, though, what do you want out of life? How do you want to be remembered? And I want you to reflect on Dr. King's words, okay? And so after this, you can go ahead and log into Blackboard. What you're going to do is you'll actually move forward to start. I'll start it for you. I'll cue it up to 30 minutes and 45 seconds into the sermon, and you can listen to just the last couple of minutes of how Reverend King wants to be remembered, okay? And then after that, we can continue on to the next slide. Okay, finally, for our last slide of content for our lecture on death and dying, I'd like to share with you one very special resource that has really helped me throughout my career talk about this notion of death and dying to those around me. And what I wanted to share with you is this, it's actually a children's book that was written called The Fall of Freddie the Leaf. And it's a beautiful story that talks about this notion of death and about life and about what it means to go through this process of being aware of our own mortality, right? And it does it in a way that's very sweet, it's very innocent, and I found that the material, the story that I'm going to share with you, works really well with kiddos, young kiddos, but it also works really well with adults, okay? Before we move into the video, though, I'd like to share with you this quote from Mark Twain. Mark Twain had said, the 2 most important days of your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why, right? And here at CBU, we talk about this notion of what it means to live your purpose. What it means first to know what your purpose is, and then what it means to actually go about living that. I want to share with you that as you move forward in your life, okay, I hope you continue to be reaffirmed about what your purpose is. And I hope you continue to celebrate and dedicate, right, every day to making that dream a reality, okay? So what I'm going to ask you to do now is to go ahead and jump onto Blackboard, and I've posted a very nice narration of the story of the fall of Freddie the Leaf. What I'd like you to be able to do is take a look at that video, okay? Think about this notion then of what it means that as we move into the final weeks of this term, as we begin to end our time talking about lifespan development, you know, what is this notion of life, right, and death come to mean in the grand scheme of things, right? Reflect on this notion of what it means to be aware of our death, but to also understand that death ultimately is a part of life. The two are connected, right? It's all one timeline. It's not life and then there's death. All of it, okay, is a part of this cycle that we're in. And then afterwards, we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. Okay, I hope you found that video, The Fall of Freddie the Leaf, helpful. It's one of those tools that I had early in my career that I very much enjoyed sharing, and I'm glad I had an opportunity to share that with you. I hope you enjoyed it. Couple of quick reminders for the end of this class today. Thank you for attending. Thank you for sticking with the lectures. Please remember to take your assignment quiz so I can give you credit for today's attendance. Please make sure to email me with any questions that you have. If you'd like to set up an appointment, just let me know that. I'm happy to reach out to you. Okay, and please make sure to also check Blackboard for any last minute assignments or anything else that you have due for the end of the term. Okay, and finally, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and jump into our scripture verse for today to center on. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You have faith in God. You have faith also in me. This comes from John chapter 14, right? Today's scripture verse will be, or word will be, happiness. Okay. So go ahead and put your hands and feet in a nice comfortable position. Take a nice deep breath. Close your eyes, and I'll come back to us in 2 minutes. Okay, open your eyes. Come on back. Thank you all so much. I appreciate you for tuning in this week. Please let me know if you have any questions, and have a great day, okay? God bless.